Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name's Angela, and this is episode 12. Alright, welcome back. Few updates before we get started. The podcast is now officially available on Google Play, which is very exciting. With the way I have it set up, it was a little tricky to figure out, but I finally got it. I have added a link onto the website. But yeah, the show is now available on the 3 biggest podfeeder sites, so that's really cool. Another thing that happened this past month, Matt from Radio Free Themyscira invited me onto his show to review Wonder Woman Earth 1 by Grant Morrison. It's going to end up being a 2-parter, but the first half is out and we had a great time, so definitely go check that out. I'm on RFT episode 5, entitled Check Your Paradise Privilege, Princess, and I will include a direct link in the show notes on the podcast website at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. Also, I went to my local Comic-Con a few weeks back, and, had a good time, typical Comic-Con stuff. Picked up a few Wonder Woman issues, nothing especially rare or spectacular, just a few individual issues that I liked. Another thing that happened at the convention, if you have seen the podcast's Instagram account, you saw that I now have some kind of business cards promoting the podcast, and I was able to hand those out to some people at the con. Yes, technically they're playing cards. Look, I had a coupon. Stop judging me, Internet. I can feel you judging me through my microphone. But anyway, if you are one of those people who got a card, and you are now listening to this episode, welcome! I hope you like the show. We're starting out with Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 10. Cover date is October 1942. Writer was Charles Moulton, who we know was really William Moulton Marsden, and the artist was Harry G. Peter. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Archives Volume 1. The issue starts out with Steve at his desk, mooning over a framed photo of Wonder Woman. It's the first anniversary of her finding him on Paradise Island, and he wishes he could see her. Diana appears, asking if she can help, but he replies no. He tells the secretary he's going to meet someone, and Diana, deducing that he's meeting a woman who reminds him of his favorite superhero, decides to tail the Major. He meets a red-headed woman and takes her out to an evening of dancing at a nightclub. They agree to meet on a train, and Diana leaves, disgusted. The next day, Steve tells Darnell he's following a clue to New York that weekend, and Diana overhears on something called a detectaphone, which seems to be some kind of spy listening device. She follows him to the station and learns which compartment he'll be in, so she sneaks aboard before the train departs and cracks open the window, marking the outside under the sill with her lipstick. She waits for the train to leave, then changes into her costume and runs after it, easily finding the marked window and jumping inside. Steve is surprised to see his angel and tries to explain that he's investigating, but just then another angel knocks on the door and he lets the redhead in. He tries to introduce Wonder Woman to his guest, whose name turns out to be Dolly Dancer, but when he turns around, the Amazon has vanished. Once in New York, Dolly goes to her apartment, where she's unsurprised to find a Japanese spy paring his fingernails with a long knife. She tells him that Steve will give her the code key that night. She thinks the Major is a good guy and doesn't want to betray him, but the spy threatens her with the knife if she fails her mission. At the Waldorf Wasporia Hotel... No, I didn't misspeak. It actually says Waldorf Wasporia instead of Waldorf Astoria. Steve is surprised to find Diana Prince, who has booked the room right next to his. She tells him Dolly is going to double-cross him, but he laughs her off, saying to leave the detective work to him. Before he leaves, he tries locking her in her room to keep her from interfering, but when she notices, she gets mad and uses her strength to pull the door off its hinges. She goes past his room and hears a noise, then peeping through the keyhole sees the Japanese spy and a couple of thugs searching for the code key. They don't find it and decide to take off, but the Amazon changes into her costume and clings hidden to the back of their car. They drive to Grand Central Station, then head down to the deepest subway tunnels, which we're told lead all over the country. Wonder Woman observes a meeting where the spies discuss their plans to blow up a tunnel when the High General's train is going through. They've intercepted a message saying when that will be, but it's encoded and they need the key, which Dolly is supposed to get from Steve that night. They spot Wonder Woman and she races away to warn the Major. She sees a poster for the show Dolly is starring in, and knowing Steve is sure to be there, gets herself invited to perform. She entertains the crowd by using her lasso to force audience members to tell the truth, like admitting to affairs and demonstrating their narcissism. But when she tries to catch Steve, he takes off running. The Amazon tails Dolly back to her apartment, who with the help of charm and champagne gets the code key from Steve. As soon as he leaves, the spies show up and decode their message, which says the army chief's trip is that night. Wonder Woman bursts in, but the spies have already disappeared. Dolly points her to a hidden elevator shaft, but when the superhero climbs down, it seems to lead only to an empty room. Confused, she takes off, and Dolly is once more met by Ishti, the Japanese spy, who gives her a bottle of knockout perfume for when the Amazon returns. Wonder Woman meets up with Etta and the Holiday Girls and leads them to Dolly's apartment complex, telling them to surround the building to make sure the spies don't escape. If they don't hear from her in 30 minutes, they're to head directly to the basement and make a thorough search. She re-enters Dolly's apartment and the girl hits her with the knockout perfume, taking the Amazon down. Ishti and his men arrive, and he takes the unconscious hero down a hidden trapdoor in the basement and into an electrical repair shop. It's revealed they killed all the railway workers except for one helmeted welder, who fastens chains to the unconscious Amazon's bracelets. Ishti then gives her an antidote, waking her up, and she realizes how helpless she is now that a man has welded her in chains. She keeps up a brave face, however, making quips even as the manacles are attached to the circuit of a high-power switchboard. She's told they're going to fry her with 1500 volts, but when the spies aren't looking, she manages to switch it from alternating current to direct current, which we're told means the charge will be harmless. They start low and crank the voltage higher and higher as she still refuses to talk, but it has no effect even when Ishti uses the current to power a light bulb. While this is going on, we see the Army Chief's carriage at Grand Central Station, but inside is actually Steve and his men. He reveals he didn't actually succumb to Dolly's charms, and instead gave her a fake code key. The soldiers know they're headed into a trap, and are ordered to fire at the spies on sight. In the meantime, Etta and the Holiday Girls are exploring the basement since Wonder Woman hasn't returned, and somehow the floor shifts, spilling them onto the roof of Steve's train as it happens to pass underneath. The Major goes to investigate, and is surprised to find the rotund college student and her friends. Back at the switchboard, Ishti gives up trying to electrocute the Amazon, saying they need to blow up the tunnel. But just then the welder, dismayed that the tunnel workers will be killed, pulls off her helmet, revealing herself to be a woman. Now knowing that she wasn't chained by a man, Wonder Woman breaks free and shoves her way past her captors. She gets to the tracks just as the train carrying Steve and her friends passes, and she uses the length of chain still attached to her bracelet to short-circuit the electric rail. This causes the fuses in the control station to blow up, halting the train. The spies try to run, but they're caught between the soldiers and college girls on one side and Wonder Woman on the other. After the fighting, Steve and Wonder Woman embrace, and he apologizes for giving his beautiful angel reason to doubt him. He tells her he was only doing what he had to, and she replies that she should have known he had better taste in women. So, at the beginning of this story, Steve says that it's been a year since he got rescued on Paradise Island. The cover date on that first issue was January of 41 and 42, but the book actually was released in October. And this is the October 1942 issue of Sensation, but the release date was in August, so Wonder Woman, the character, hasn't been around for a full year at this point. When Steve takes Dolly out to dinner, Diana seems to be saying that she's surprised he's taking her to a nightclub, even though on their one date, he did take her to a nightclub, back when she was investigating the Bullfinch department store. Although the way it's said is a little odd. It seems to be that she's talking about Steve not being the type of guy who goes to nightclubs, but I guess it could be interpreted that he's not the kind of guy who would take another woman out, even though he's pining after Wonder Woman. To the surprise of no one, the Japanese spy Ishti is a pretty awful stereotype. Unfortunately, because America was at war with Japan at the time, that was considered a perfectly acceptable depiction. And let's be fair, the German spies in this issue are also incredibly ridiculous, cartoony figures. And we have the same thing with one of the black stewards on the train. I don't like having to bring this up every time, but I do think that it's important to call it out. Moving on to more positive matters, there was some great action shots in this issue of Wonder Woman racing after the train and swinging off a balcony, so that was fun. One thing I had a problem with Was Steve trying to lock Diana into her hotel room? I mean, first of all, I don't even know how that works, to lock someone into a hotel room, but let's just assume that the way that hotel locks worked in the 40s was different than today. But still, I mean, I get that he's on a mission and she's interfering, but there's better ways to handle that than literally trying to lock her up. I mean, even just, sitting her down and saying, look, I'm on a mission. I know it sounds weird, but I outrank you, so I'm just telling you now, stay out of it and let me do what I know I need to do. And, that makes sense for Secretary Diana Prince. For Wonder Woman, of course, she's gonna come in and help him because that's her job, but there was just so many better ways to do it than literally trying to lock her in her own room. The bit about switching the circuit from AC to DC, yeah, I'm not an electrician, but everything that I'm looking up says that it's not possible to survive 1500 volts, even if it's direct current. So that's more than a little bit on the ridiculous side. One part that was pretty funny, when the Holiday Girls land on the roof of the train, and Steve goes up to investigate, he gets there and Edda's just sitting comfortably with a box of chocolates, and she's like, "Oh, hey Steve, small world," and offers him a bonbon, which is just classic Edda. The part about Wonder Woman's bracelets being chained, Ishti mentioned that he learned this trick from Paula von Gunther, which I thought was pretty cool. And the bit about it not being a man who did it, but a woman, I mean, it seems a little ridiculous. Is it all in her head, where Wonder Woman thinks that it was a guy who chained her, and so therefore she can't break free? Or did she just not even test to see if her strength was gone or not? I mean, obviously the real reason is because it's a story and they needed to add drama, but it just came off as a little ridiculous. One thing I did like was that the welder mentions that all of the workers in the tunnel are women, since the men are off at war. That really was a big deal in the 40s. Women had to go into the workplace because there were no men around, they were all off fighting, and so you had the empowerment of women and the whole Rosie the Riveter thing. I should mention that at the same time this comic came out, All-Star Comics number 13 was published. That's the issue where Wonder Woman officially joins the Justice Society of America, which was kind of a 1940s precursor to the Justice League of America. It seems she had been an honorary member before this, but this is when she first joined full-time. Obviously, I'm not going to review that issue. From what I'm reading, the members of the Justice Society got kidnapped and sent to different planets, and Wonder Woman ended up on Venus and meeting an alien queen and helped her defeat some kind of invaders. So because of her help in that mission, she was invited to join the Justice Society, which is pretty cool. Except that it very specifically says that she was their secretary and never really went on missions with them. Now, I know that sounds pretty bad, but from what I'm reading, the reason behind it wasn't quite as horrible as you might think. Apparently, William Moulton Marston wanted complete control of the character and wanted to be the only one writing stories where she was involved. And he just ended up being too busy working on other projects to be able to write the Justice Society as well. So in those stories, she would only really appear for maybe a page or two and would only say, "Goodbye, boys, I wish I was going with you," since they couldn't really do anything with her character. Anyway, back to the issue at hand. I thought it was a good story with some nice twists and turns, so let's give it 3 stars. Alright, moving on to the post-crisis, we have Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 12, Echoes of the Past, which is Challenge of the Gods, Book 3. Cover date was January 1988. Plots and layouts were by George Perez. The script was by Len Wein. The finishes were by Bruce D. Patterson. It was lettered by John Costanza, colored by Carl Gafford, and edited by Karen Berger. And I'm reading this from the Wonder Woman by George Perez Omnibus. The issue picks up with Hippolyte following her daughter's path through the dark cavern. She speculates that the vulture accompanying her has some kind of power here, as the doorway opened just enough to let her in when it came close, then quickly shut behind. As she climbs down, she has a moment to wonder where Cottus is, then is attacked by a swarm of little bat monsters. The vulture watches as she reaches the ground, then lays her round shield face down and pours the oil she'd brought to make torches into the bowl, lighting it with a flint. The creatures of darkness try to flee the light, but she flings the burning liquid at them, sending them flaming to the ground like 100 falling meteors. At Steve's aunt and uncle's house in Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the... No, wait, that's not right. The colonel is spending a moment alone with his father's body. He tells his dad how sorry he is for not arriving in time, and wishes he could have told him how much he meant to him one last time. In the living room, Etta sees a photo of Steve's mother, and learns from Aunt Edna that she died about 40 years ago, and that her name was Diana. Back to Wonder Woman, the masked warrior removes her helmet, revealing this Diana to indeed be Steve's mother. She tells the Amazon that they were fated to meet, and it's finally time to learn of her heritage. Born Diana Rockwell, Steve's mother shared her namesake's love of flying, becoming a pilot when she was still just a teenager. She met Ulysses Stephen Trevor, and the two were married in 1940. The next year, Pearl Harbor was attacked, with their son Stephen Rockwell Trevor being born a few weeks later. Wonder Woman finally realizes who she's talking to, and Mrs. Trevor replies that Ares' love of irony made the choice of using her son to try and destroy the Amazons too tempting, although all he actually ended up doing was strengthen the bond between the two women. Diana continues her story. She became a member of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron in 1942, and with both of his parents in the military, Steve was raised by his father's sister and her husband. When the war ended, Diana wanted to retire, but the lure of flying was too strong. While this is going on, Pan, desperate to hide his secret, pulls the teeth from the Hydra's smoking skeleton and plants them in the cavern floor. Hippolyta follows the vulture past the aftermath of her daughter's battle with the multi-headed monster, but the goat god, hiding behind a pillar, plays music on his pipe, and suddenly skeletons, armed with shields and flaming swords, spring from the ground to attack. After the chaplain has left Steve's aunt and uncle's house, and all the plans for the funeral have been made, the family and Etta reminisce over an old photo album. Steve points out a photo of his mother wearing her flight jacket decorated with service patches, commenting that she was wearing it the last time he saw her. Wonder Woman's namesake tells the Amazon about the last time she said goodbye to her son before leaving to test a new jet fighter. But on that test flight, there was a sudden storm, and her instruments went crazy. A bolt of lightning destroyed her wing, and she managed to eject in time, but her parachute was ripped by the falling wreckage, and she plunged into the ocean. Just before she passed out, she saw the water come alive, funneling her in a direction that must have been dictated by the gods. Fighting valiantly, Hippolyta is able to defeat her undead foes with only a minor wound. She approaches the two doorways, unsure of which to choose, but the keening of the strange pillar of pallor makes it all but impossible to think. Then the vulture flies up, and gazes into the pillar's 1,000 screaming faces, somehow communicating compassion without words, and with that small amount of solace, the pillar falls silent. The dark bird then flies through the left-hand opening, the Amazon Queen following behind. As she disappears down a flight of steps, Pan shows up in the right-hand portal, annoyed that she chose the correct one when her daughter didn't, but confident that without Wonder Woman's help, her mother is doomed to failure. Diana Trevor's story picks up with her washing up on an unknown shore, and when she awakened, she saw a strange glow of energy in the distance, and heard the cries of women's voices. She found the cavern leading to the massive door, which the many arms of Cottus were trying to break through. The Amazon warriors were in fierce battle with the monster, which had managed to grab Menelippe. It threw Philippus to the ground and started to rip her to shreds when Diana opened fire with her gun. This caused Cottus to try and retreat, taking the oracle with it, but Philippus and Diana both charged forward to attack. With the monster crushing the life out of her with its many hands, the American managed to aim her gun right between its glowing eyes, the flash and explosion of her shot being the last thing she ever saw or heard. We quickly jump back to Steve as he tells Etta how, on the day before Christmas, they got the news that his mother had been lost. Then return to Diana, who says how she remembers someone holding her and telling that person her name just before she died. Wonder Woman is somehow surprised that she's been talking to a dead woman, but then Hades appears. He tells the superhero that she, and those who haven't wasted their lives, has nothing to fear from him, then continues the story. How Diana was given a funeral befitting an honorable warrior, and how 2 sets of armor were made designed after the patches and insignias on the pilot's jacket. One was worn by Diana on her funeral pyre, and the other, along with the hero's strange weapon, was sealed away until someone worthy of taking up her mantle could claim it. Interspersed with scenes from Ulysses Trevor's military funeral, we watch as Hades tells the fallen warrior it's time to finally go to the Elysian fields, where a loved one is waiting. She bids the Amazon farewell, calling her daughter and telling her that all her hopes now rest with the woman who shares her first name and the man who shares her last. Returned to the cave, Wonder Woman flies through the darkness, glad that she finally knows the truth. She comes across Pan sitting on a stalagmite, who tells her of her next challenge. He opens a portal to the planet Oa, homeworld of the Green Lantern Corps, and explains that she must meet with an alien race known as the Guardians of the Universe and help in the birth of immortal man. He tells her to be wary of a foe called the Manhunters, who are supposedly impossible to escape from, but she goes through the portal gladly, proud in the knowledge that she's a member of both Paradise Island and Man's World, and completely misses the triumphantly evil grin that spreads across the goat god's face as he calls the departing Amazon a fool. Meanwhile, Hippolyta walks through a crumbling temple, noting that the vulture that was leading her has flown off. She sees the path leading down and some strange rock formations before she's attacked by a group of harpies. The bird-women monsters force her over the edge of the stone bridge she was crossing, but she manages to catch herself by digging her battle axe into the crag. But as she does, the rock cries out with an anguished yell, and she recognizes the voice. She looks up and sees what she took to be a bridge was actually an outstretched arm, and she's currently hanging from the bicep of the giant, calcified, but somehow still alive form of Heracles. I found the scenes where Steve was saying goodbye to his father and mourning his loss really touching. He talks about how he always looked up to him, and he wanted his dad to be proud of him, and how his father's approval when he graduated military school was better than any medal he could have gotten. He talks about how much the loss of his mother affected him, and how he had a dream after she died that she was looking over him from beyond the grave, and how now both of his parents are going to be doing that. It was just really touching. Relating Wonder Woman's origin to the women pilots from World War II was a really great idea. Obviously, that's a product of this being from the 80s. You couldn't really do that these days without it having to be Steve's grandmother, if not great-grandmother at this point. Diana talks about how she was a member of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, or the WAFS. At least, I guess that's how you would pronounce it. It could be WAFS. They were a group of 28 women pilots who, because of the shortage of men to fly planes, took up the job of, flying transport planes. That group only lasted about a year before it merged with the Women's Flying Training Detachment, and the two became the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP, again, maybe WASP, which had over 1,000 women pilots. I love the detail that they designed Diana's armor off of the patches from her jacket. I looked it up, and the WAF's insignia patch was the standard Air Force patch, which was a blue circle with a white star with a red dot in the middle, and then 2 gold wings coming off of the star. And then for the WAFs, you just had their initials written below it. In the comic, we do see the tattered fabric when they're creating the armor, and we see what looks like a W in a circle with some wings. That looks a whole lot more like the WASP pilot badge, which were kind of like pilot wings. Originally, it was 2 wings with a shield shape in the middle and the class that the woman had graduated from, which would be W and then the class number. But then later, it changed from a shield to a diamond shape. And actually, when you look at the thing and kind of squint, it does look a bit like the Wonder Woman symbol, with the diamond in the middle kind of being the point, and then the 2 wings on either side. So that's a great historical connection that I really loved. And I will include links in the show notes to these patches and badges, so you can see for yourself. Pan getting the Hydra teeth and planting them in the ground, that is a direct reference to the movie Jason and the Argonauts from 1963, where the hero Jason manages to kill the Hydra, but then his opponent plants its teeth and outgrows a bunch of skeleton warriors. That's a really famous scene from cinema with the live-action people fighting stop-motion skeletons. And I gotta say, the scene where Hippolyta is fighting the skeletons is just amazing, with some really great action panels. In the original myth, however, it wasn't the Hydra, it was just a dragon. Just a dragon. And they weren't specifically skeletons, just normal warriors. I have tried and cannot find any mythological connection for this Pillar of Pallor thing. If anyone knows the origin of that, please, contact me and let me know, because I have searched all over and cannot find any reference in Greek mythology to a screaming pillar. Another thing I really loved in this issue was the way that they depicted Hades. He wasn't evil, he wasn't some kind of satanic figure, he was very close to the original Greek version. He's just a god who happens to rule over the underworld. That kind of depiction is super rare in any depiction of Greek mythology, so it's really great to see it here. Pan sending Wonder Woman through a portal to a different planet, that is a connection to the crossover that was going on at the time called Millennium. If you're not that familiar with the comics, there is a race of aliens called the Guardians of the Universe who live on the planet Oa, and they've created these basically rings of power that they assign to different beings throughout the universe to create a basically space police force called the Green Lantern Corps. I will probably get into more details of the crossover in the next issue when it has a little more influence, but basically the Guardians of the Universe are moving on to a different dimension, and the remaining one has decided that he's going to create a new immortal race by giving power to some humans from Earth, and he calls together all the superheroes to help him find these select people. But the problem is that there's a group of robots called the Manhunters, who the Guardians created in their first attempt to organize a interstellar police force, but then they went evil and now are trying to stop them from creating this new race of immortals. So yeah, the reveal at the end of Heracles was really surprising. I'm not sure how he managed to become a stone giant in this underworld, but I'm really excited to find out. So I really loved this issue. It had great action, it had great pathos. I loved the way it connected Wonder Woman's history to real World War II history. It was just amazing all around, so I'm giving it 5 stars. Next up, we have the New 52 issue, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 12, Birthright. Cover date is October 2012. Executive editor was Bobby Chase. Cover artist was Cliff Chang. Writer was Brian Azzarello. Penciler and inker was Cliff Chang. Colorist was Matthew Wilson. Letterer was Jared K. Fletcher. And the editors were Matt Idelson and Chris Conroy. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 2, Guts. Picking up right where the last issue left off, Wonder Woman and Hermes are confronting Apollo and Artemis on Mount Olympus as Hera, Strife, and Zola look on. The sun god says his oracles have predicted a threat to the Olympian family, and that with him on the throne they'll be able to survive it. He claims it's his birthright and there's too much at stake, and Diana agrees. The life of her friend is at stake, and, Hermes reminds them, her unborn baby. Apollo makes a dumb joke about having to kill the messenger, and his sister joins the fight. Wonder Woman, promising to overcome Artemis this time, deflects the moon goddess's blasts with her bracers, and as they battle, Hera drags her captive to the mountain's precipice. The girl cries out in pain, a dark stain appearing in her lap, and Strife, still wondering why her mother gave up the throne so easily, thinks the mortal so scared she lost control of her bladder. But the Queen of the Gods knows better. Zola's water just broke. Hera explains to her daughter something only she knows, that Zeus, entitled king that he is, will return to claim his power the moment Apollo tries to take it. She then tosses her captive off the cliff, telling her that both she and her child will grow old as they fall forever. Wonder Woman breaks off her fight with Artemis and chases after her friend. As she runs, Hermes plucks a feather from his ankle wing and tosses it at the Amazon, and when the glowing pinion connects with her boot, she's suddenly able to fly. The superhero takes off and swoops over the edge, flying down to catch Zola in her arms. With Wonder Woman gone and Hermes pinned by Artemis, Apollo finally sits on the throne, declaring himself Lord of Olympus. There's a loud blast, and cracks appear on the mountain, and Hera gleefully cries out that Zeus has returned. Wonder Woman, still flying back to the summit, has to dodge and force her way through falling boulders as she tells Zola, now definitely in labor, to push. Back at the throne, Apollo proves the queen wrong, saying he's changing Olympus to fit his will. The carved eagle on the back of the throne becomes a huge glowing firebird, and the ancient Greek architecture is giving way to modern skyscrapers. Hera kneels in shame before the new king, and a glowing green flame passes between them as he banishes her, using his newfound power to make her disappear. Wonder Woman lands and passes Zola off to Hermes, and Strife, unable to resist living up to her name, points out to Apollo that it very well could be the new child who's the one destined to kill a god and take the throne. The Amazon has Hermes teleport Zola to safety as she goes to fulfill her promise of defeating Artemis. She removes her bracers, dropping them to the ground where they cause the stone to crack under their weight. Artemis laughs derisively, saying the Amazons removed her defense, but Wonder Woman, now glowing with immense power, tells the goddess that the bracers were really protecting her. She easily outmaneuvers Artemis, pounding her head into the ground and grabbing her in a chokehold before Apollo calls for her to stop. He's now ready to make a deal, and Wonder Woman tells him he won't attack Zola's child or she will fulfill the dreaded prophecy herself. He agrees on one condition, that if it becomes apparent that the child will be the one who kills for the throne, Diana will slay it herself. We see Hermes delivering the baby as Wonder Woman is teleported back outside the medical center. Hera is there, still kneeling in the mud, covering her face in shame, and Lennox is sitting nearby, taping himself up. She tells him Apollo now has their father's throne, and that stopping him really didn't seem important. She asks about Zola, and he replies that he hasn't seen her. Then we cut to the new mother's face as she breathes, labor finally over. She asks to see her child, but there's a blue flash, and she cries out the messenger god's name in anguish. Wonder Woman rushes in to find the woman alone, and the panicking Zola tells her that Hermes took her baby. Hera, who managed to rouse herself when she heard the scream, says that's to be expected from the thief god, and Zola throws a tray at her face. At first the exiled queen is furious, but her anger fades to shock as she realizes she's bleeding, meaning she's now mortal. Wonder Woman hugs her sobbing friend, vowing to track down Hermes and rescue the baby, and that the messenger will pay for his betrayal. We next see Hermes in a room made completely from woven branches and vines, having handed off the baby to Demeter. He tells the harvest goddess that the bawling child will soon have a real reason to cry, and as he talks the scene shifts. When he mentions death and betrayal and the possible destruction of Olympus, we see a frozen landscape and a bloody arm burst out of a snowdrift. And as we watch a figure putting on a strange winged helmet and traveling through a red tube of energy, the panel shapes become block letters spelling out boom, and Hermes mentions that from another point of view, there will be a new beginning with new gods. I like the way they had Hermes gifting Wonder Woman the ability to fly in this issue. I'm wondering if that's just temporary, or if she'll be able to keep it. Kinda up in the air, since Hermes is now revealed to be a traitor. Heh, up in the air. I genuinely didn't realize that until right now when I'm editing the show. I've gotta wonder, with Strife talking about the prophecy like that, did no one else ever think of this before? I mean, it kind of seems like the obvious choice. There's a prophecy about a child of Zeus killing one of the gods and taking the throne, just as a woman finds out she's now pregnant with one of his kids. I mean, in-world, the obvious choice is that it's going to be this kid. Out-of-world, the name of the comic is Wonder Woman, and she's a demigod daughter of Zeus, so it very well could be her. Wonder Woman removing her bracelets to gain strength is actually a callback to the pre-Crisis universe. We haven't gotten there yet, but Marsden wrote that when an Amazon's bracelets are removed, her strength goes out of control and she goes into a frenzy. It was supposed to be a metaphor about how strength needs to be tempered with love, but the idea of a woman unbound having superpowered mood swings and irritability really doesn't sit well with modern audiences. And really, if you want to be technical about it, we saw her without her bracelets all the way back in issue 1, when she was in bed and Zola woke her up, so little bit of a continuity error there. But here, it's kind of unleashing her I guess, demigod power, so to speak. And the way the art depicts her is really cool. Her eyes glow a crackling blue, and her red bodice turns black, and the seams glow bright red. The star in her tiara glows red as well, and the ends of her hair kind of go all zigzaggy like a lightning bolt. So you can really tell she's unleashing her full power as the daughter of Zeus. I gotta say, I genuinely did not see Hermes' betrayal coming, and that was really shocking. I mean, he's been one of her closest allies for 12 issues now, and to learn that it was just a ruse to be able to kidnap the baby was really shocking. The reference here at the end, the guy with the winged helmet and going through a red tube with the panel spelling out boom, that is a reference to a group of characters called the New Gods. They were created by comic book legend Jack Kirby in the 70s. I actually don't know too much about them. They come from a planet called New Genesis, and they travel through basically wormhole portals called boom tubes, hence the text spelling out boom. And from the look of his helmet, this character is a guy named Orion. So I don't want to spoil too much by researching and going over the lore of the New Gods, because I'm sure that's going to be a big deal in the upcoming story. This is the last issue in this volume, so at the end we've got some more character sketches. You've got Diana in her armor form that she went to the underworld in, and we've got looks at Hephaestus and Artemis and Meter, some alternate takes on the covers, and some preliminary sketches, which is, always nice. So yeah, for kind of wrapping up the story so far, and the reveal of Hermes being a traitor, and Wonder Woman showing the extent of her power, this was a pretty good issue. I'm going to give it 4 stars. On to the TV show, we have Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 11, Formula 407. The original air date was January 22nd, 1977, starring Linda Carter and Lyle Waggoner. Nehemiah Persoff played Professor Moreno, Marissa Pavan played Maria, and John Devlin played Major Carl Keller. At an ordnance test range, Steve, Blankenship, Diana, and Etta observe a truck roll over landmines and have bazookas shot at its wheels, but remain completely unharmed. The general tells them the rubber tires have been modified with a new invention, Formula 407, which makes them as strong as steel. This formula was created by the Argentinian scientist Professor Moreno, who decided to give it to the Allies. Steve's mission is to retrieve the formula from the professor in his neutral homeland, and Diana, who speaks fluent Spanish, is to accompany him as translator. Etta wishes she was going, but Blankenship warns them that despite the country's neutrality, Argentina is brimming with Nazi sympathizers. In Buenos Aires, Professor Moreno tests his formula again, still amazed that his years of hard work have finally paid off. His assistant Maria tells him that if it were not wartime, he would win many scientific awards, but he says it will all be worth it if his invention can save lives. At the SS headquarters in Berlin, a general tells Major Carl Keller how important obtaining this formula is for the fatherland, since their access to rubber supplies has been cut off. He orders him to not only retrieve it, but keep it out of American hands, and if he does so, there's a promotion waiting for him when he returns. The next day in D.C., Etta tries to talk with Diana about how romantic the trip will be, but the Omen doesn't seem to get it. We next see her and Steve arrive in Buenos Aires and meet up with the American ambassador, who repeats the warning of secret Nazi agents. Sure enough, a group of Nazis lie in wait for Ambassador Macaulay's car, discussing how they're going to blame the attack on local peasants, which will keep the international outrage to a minimum. When the Americans' car arrives, they run it off the road and block off the escape routes, then force Steve and the ambassador to go with them, leaving Diana with the injured driver. Once she's sure he's okay, she takes off after the Germans, spinning into her costume when she sees they're about to execute their captives. She leaps into action, and with the help of Steve, sends the Nazis running. He's surprised to see her in Argentina, but she says she's there to help. She tells them Diana and the driver are unharmed, and Macaulay tries to invite her to a fancy dinner party at Professor Moreno's house. The Amazon gives them a non-committal answer, then takes off. That evening, Steve, Macaulay, and Diana arrive at the professor's house dressed to the nines. They're introduced to Moreno and his family, his daughter Lydia and his assistant Maria. Moreno tells them his assistant was vital in developing the formula, but she'll soon be leaving them, and we're introduced to her fiancé, who the audience recognizes as the Nazi Major Keller. We get a quick scene of the Nazis who attacked the ambassador's car sneaking onto Moreno's grounds under cover of darkness, then cut to the dinner party, where Keller is posing as a Swiss businessman. As they retire to the sitting room, Diana is accosted by another dinner guest, Antonio Cruz, who tells her American women are his one weakness. He compliments her in the most skin-crawlingly creepy way, and tells her that without her glasses she'd be beautiful, but she escapes as politely as possible. Maria and Keller observe Lydia flirting with Steve, which they seem to be happy about, but then Keller makes a comment about Steve being in danger, and his fiancée reminds him that he said no one would get hurt. He tells her he'll try, but then steps outside for a walk and secretly meets with the hidden Nazi agents, telling them he wants to capture the Major. He scoffs at their story about Wonder Woman, saying she only won because his men were taken by surprise, then orders them to wait for his signal. Back inside, Antonio continues to not get the hint, pestering Diana to let down her hair. Keller encourages Lydia to take Steve on a walk, during which they're attacked by his men. Diana spots the scuffle through the window and, sending her would-be romancer away to get her champagne, slips outside and spins into her costume. She joins the fight, but one of the men manages to pin her and renders the Amazon unconscious with a chloroform-soaked rag. The next morning, we see Steve and the still unconscious Wonder Woman held under guard in the professor's wine cellar. In the lab, Moreno greets Maria, saying that he left the party early in order to check the formula one last time and has been there all night. She tells him that Diana, Antonio, and the ambassador all left separately, and that Lydia had a moonlight stroll with Steve. Back in the cellar, the Major nudges Wonder Woman awake and tells her of their situation. She snaps the cord binding her wrist as if it were dental floss, then frees his hands. The walls are too thick to call for help, so in order to trick the guards into opening the door, Wonder Woman tips over a large wine rack, ruining 5 casks and 61 bottles. I counted. Look, I'm not much of a wine person, but even I think that's a tragic waste. It does the job, though, and they escape while trapping their guards. Back in the lab, Keller reveals his true identity to Moreno. The professor refuses to give him the formula, but the German tells him that not only will he hand it over, he'll create a defective one for the Americans, so their equipment will be less effective against the Nazis. Keller plays his final card. Lydia has been kidnapped and won't be returned unless Moreno, who has an hour to decide, cooperates. Maria is shocked, insisting that Keller promised no one would get hurt. We get a quick scene showing us that the girl is tied up in a rundown shack near the ocean, then back to the lab as her father tries to comfort the devastated Maria. He tells her they'll see his daughter again, but she insists he can't give up the formula, though he replies he'll do what he must. Finally out of the cellar, Wonder Woman and Steve find the lab, but have to inform the anxious father that they've searched the house and Lydia is nowhere to be found. He tells them Keller is the mastermind, and as he and Steve debate what to do, the Amazon slips out of the room. She finds Maria, telling the woman she's a friend here to help find Lydia. The lab assistant is still in shock after discovering her fiancé to be a traitor, saying she doesn't know where the girl could be. Meanwhile, Keller meets with his men, and orders one to kill Lydia after they have the formula. The professor decides to do whatever Steve thinks is best, so the Major tells him to switch the fake formula for the real one. Keller sees right through the deception, however, as before the war he was working on a similar formula as a research assistant, and so can easily recognize a fake. Moreno reluctantly hands over the real formula, but when he asks about his daughter and Keller only smirks, the professor lashes out with his fists, and Steve comes out of his hiding place to help in the fight. Keller's men burst in, however, and quickly have the Major at gunpoint. The professor is locked up, and Keller, now in possession of everything he came for, leads his captive out. He orders one of his men to stay behind and ensure there are no witnesses, but Wonder Woman is able to block the man's gunfire and catch him in her lasso. She learns from him that Keller is meeting up with a U-boat at the shore, with Lydia held captive in a shack near the rendezvous point. She arrives just in time to stop the man sent to eliminate the girl, then races to the beach. When she appears, Steve takes advantage of Keller's distraction to attack the man, and they wrestle for control as swimmers from the U-boat make land. They recognize the Amazon and start lobbing stick grenades at her, which she easily catches and throws far away so their explosions are harmless. Once they see this, the swimmers turn tail and quickly paddle back into the ocean, and by the time she gets to Steve, he's already subdued the German. A few days later in Washington, Etta is gushing about how the postcard Diana sent her made the trip sound so romantic. Despite Steve's pointing out that the Nazis made it a less than pleasant trip, Diana says Buenos Aires was beautiful and she'd like to return someday, though Etta adds she'd need to go with the right person. Steve teases his secretary about Antonio, and she gets him right back by mentioning Lydia. Suddenly all brusque in business, he tells the amused Etta to inform the General that the first of the equipment using Formula 409 will be ready within a week. After she leaves, he points out that were it not for Wonder Woman, the Nazis would be the ones using the formula. He wonders how the superhero always knows when she's needed, to which his secretary suggests women's intuition. So yeah, Argentina, along with a few other South American countries, was neutral during World War II. And then after the war, it was one of the safe havens where Nazis who'd managed to escape Europe could hide. We get to see Linda Carter speaking Spanish in this episode. I've seen some references online to the fact that she is fluent in Spanish, but I can't seem to find anything very official, or even like an interview where she speaks Spanish. But her mother's family was originally from Mexico, so it makes sense that she would be somewhat fluent. When she rescues Steve and the ambassador from being executed, Steve mentions that she came in like the cavalry, and when she doesn't understand that reference, he says, "Didn't you go see westerns in the theater when you were a kid?" Which makes me wonder, does Steve not realize that she's an Amazon? That she wouldn't have had a chance to go see movies as a kid because she grew up on Paradise Island where there are no movie theaters. The way he's talking, I wonder what he thinks her origin is. I like that Wonder Woman specifically sought out Maria. This is a woman who just found out that the man in her life who has been acting like part of the family for months, if not years, is actually just a complete scumbag traitor spy and cares about them so little that he cold-heartedly kidnapped Lydia and ordered her execution. That's a lot for anyone to take in. So Wonder Woman trying to tell her not to feel too bad because she was deceived was a really great character moment. This episode had a shot that is a relatively well-known internet meme. It's Wonder Woman holding up a finger with kind of a sassy look, and the text says, "Oh no you didn't." But actually, in context, that's from the scene where she saves Lydia and is telling her to stay right there. I've seen that meme around the web, so it was pretty funny to recognize it in the actual episode. So, yeah, catching the bad guys while they're on the beach, waiting for a U-boat, feels very familiar at this point. But I loved the part where the swimmers from the U-boat see that she just easily catches these grenades they're throwing at her, and they just straight up turn around and run away. It was pretty darn funny. And the character moment at the end was just great. I love that they were able to poke fun at each other about Antonio and Lydia, and then Etta just with this huge grin on her face and Steve being flustered. It was just a lot of fun. So yeah, all in all, I liked this one. I'm going to give it 3 stars. Alright, on to the news. On March 20, Gal Gadot announced via her Instagram account that she had given birth to her second daughter, Maya. So congrats to her and her husband, Yaren, for this new bundle of joy in their lives. We also have a new Wonder Woman trailer, which is really awesome. It's called the Official Origin trailer. We get to see Diana as a little girl, and her training as she grew up. And in part of her training, she smashes her bracers together and creates a shockwave for presumably the first time, which is awesome. We see her arrive in Man's World, specifically London, and she's less than impressed. We get more footage of the lasso, and there's even some hints that maybe she is flying. The comedy bit at the end that is apparently a requirement now is her in her Diana Prince outfit, still carrying this god killer sword that she presumably is going to try to kill Ares with, and a shield, and she has trouble just, getting through a revolving door, and Steve and Etta are trying to convince her to put them away, which is cute. The one thing that I'm a little nervous about, we get some voiceover from Hippolyta telling one of the Amazons who's training Diana that she has to train her super, super hard until she's the best Amazon ever, but then mentions that she must never find out the truth about her origin. Which, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I just can't help getting flashbacks to, like, the New 52 and Wonder Woman Earth 1, where the sculpted from clay origin turns out to not be real, and in fact she ends up being the daughter of Zeus or somebody. And I really would prefer not to see that in the movie. If that is the route they're going, the obvious choices would either be Zeus or, even worse, Ares, which I would really prefer to not be the case. I mean, technically, from mythology, Ares was the father of Hippolyta, so there'd almost be a... Honestly, the way Hippolyta goes, oh, she must never find the truth of what she is, just kind of reminds me of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, where there was supposed to be some kind of mystery about Peter Parker's birth and his parents, and it just kind of ended up falling flat. So, fingers crossed, hope that doesn't happen with Wonder Woman. The movie has officially received a PG-13 rating, which is a surprise to no one. Although there was a rumor that we would see an R-rated cut, I really hope that's not the case, just because it's Wonder Woman, you don't really need to be R-rated. Something like Logan or Deadpool, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe even Batman, but not Wonder Woman. We also have a new trailer for the Justice League movie, which is a decent enough trailer, I guess. It only really has a few shots of Diana, and then there's a pretty epic bit where the Amazon army is kind of fighting what looks like the bug monster parademon things from the future dream sequence thing from Batman v Superman. We got word that the 2009 animated Wonder Woman movie is going to be re-released on a special Commemorative Edition Blu-ray, which will be awesome. I really like that movie. It's a nice entry point for people brand new to Wonder Woman. There's some news here about controversy over Wonder Woman's armpits, which I'm not even going to dignify by going into. And lastly, the DC Legion of Collectors, which is one of those blind box services, kind of like Loot Crate. They announced that their May box is going to be Wonder Woman themed. You can order that on their website up until May 1st. They claim that it's going to be a $50 value for only $25, and it's supposed to have an exclusive pop vinyl figure and apparel and collectibles and accessories and all that fun stuff. I ordered mine already. I'm looking forward to it finally arriving, and I'm considering doing an unboxing video. If that's something you're interested in, definitely contact the show, either on Facebook or Twitter, or send me an email saying, hey, yeah, do an unboxing video. There aren't enough of those on the internet. And I will, of course, include links to all of this stuff at the podcast website. Anyway, that's it for this episode. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. Please let me know if you're okay with your message being read on the podcast. The podcast homepage is wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. There you can find the RSS feed, as well as the show notes and links to the iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play feeds. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman Theme, the Best Themyscira Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil. You can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Double Clicks. You can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Next month, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 11, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 13, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 0, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 12. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve, and when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from going under, and we'll watch you in